This is so exciting and also bittersweet. Welcome to the final day of Supercharged, our 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit. What a jam packed week we've been having. I hope you all were able to attend the last few sessions. And if not, I'm glad you can make this one because we saved the best for last. Today's event was brought to you by Modern Sales Pros. So, a little bit about MSP. If you're not familiar, we're the world's largest and highest quality community of sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue ops, and sales enablement leaders. Did I say sales enough for you? Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer the toughest revenue questions out there. If you're not a member yet, you'll be invited to join after the summit, and I really hope you do. The summit would not be possible without our amazing partners. So, snaps, kudos, jazz hands, please show them all the love. We can't thank them enough for making this amazing week happen. To learn more about our partners, click on the sponsor booths that's at the top of your screen next to stage agenda and check out all the ungated, valuable resources that our sponsors have made available. So, of course, if this is your first day joining us, this week's summit was full of ways for your teams to get supercharged. If you want to see a recap of what our incredible panels this week were about, you're going to go up to the agenda tab that's at the top left for you of this event page and check it out, as well as what you can see on the screen. It was full and incredible. So, I'm going to go into the agenda for today's session. So, our agenda for the last day, I'm going to go over some housekeeping notes. Then the speakers will do what they do best, which is introduce themselves, and we'll dive into some content. We'll have some time for Q&A, of course, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways. But before we get started, let's go into the housekeeping. So, first, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and the key takeaways on the summit page of the MSP website following this event. So, if you missed the last 2 days, don't fret. All recordings of the amazing discussions and content will be available after the summit on our MSP website. And second, if you have any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A function that's on the right side of your screen so we can get them answered live. And lastly, the chat is wide open and we really want you all to interact. Please do what you do best, network, let us know where you're joining from, just send some emojis, whatever you feel, but please feel free to use that chat feature. And so the last but not least amazing panel is starting right now. The name of this panel is From 10 Million to 100 Million, the CRO's Game Plan to Long-Term Growth. And fun fact for you all, we have not one, not three, but 5 CROs to speak with today. There's a lot of star power on the screen, as you can see. So we're really excited for you all to hear from them. So let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to the one, the only, the incredible Natalie Peled-David, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Lattice, to get us started. So Natalie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Janisha. I'm super excited to be here today. So I'm Natalie. I'm former EVP Revenue at PX and current Chief of Staff, actually, to the CRO at Lattice. For the last 10 years, I've been leading sales and go-to-market teams for U.S. and Israeli-based B2B tech companies. And throughout that time, I've remained really curious about what do the best companies and the best leaders do to drive healthy and sustainable growth. So the goal of our discussion today is to dive in and understand how can you be successful on the journey of growing your company from 10 to 100 million? And to do so, as Janisha said, we're going to hear from expert revenue leaders, and we've got a powerhouse panel today about their own experiences and some practical advice they can share, including how do they develop long-term strategies? What are some of the key milestones on the road from 10 to 100 million that require major change? What are the processes that will help you get there? And we'll flag some of the common pitfalls to look out for if you want to ensure that your planning processes are effective. So with that, I'd love to have the members of our panel introduce themselves and say a word or two about the experiences they've had that are going to inform their perspective on our conversation today. So Alex, would you start?
Absolutely. Thanks, Natalie. My name is Alex Latrovers. I am the current Chief Revenue Officer at Flock Safety. So I serve our sales, marketing, revenue operations, and customer success teams. Prior to joining Flock Safety, I was the Vice President of Enterprise Sales at Terminus. I came over to Flock at about 5 million in ARR, and we are rapidly approaching 100 million. So over the course of about 2 years, and excited to talk with you all today.
Wow, incredible. Andrew, how about you go next?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. I'm super excited to be here to talk to everybody. So I'm currently leading sales and success and rev operations enablement here at Spekit. Joined the company during our seed round. We're now through our Series B. We have 5 go-to-market team members. Are now about 70 members across the team and scaling quite rapidly. So we're just seeing a ton of success and having a ton of fun at an early stage startup. Previous to Spekit, been with high growth organizations. So it was with WalkMe for 3 years. Spent some time in Israel as well, leading their enterprise global teams. Obviously, a recent successful IPO, and then spent some time in the call center space with TalkDesk, leading them through Series B. And then previous to that with Zendesk as one of their first sales managers from SMB through their commercial, leading enterprise North America and through a successful IPO there. In my tech sales career early on at Salesforce, starting from the bottom as SDR and working my way up through the ranks and stuff. So excited to share all the learning experiences over the last 18 years in this space.
Great. We're so happy to have you. We're going to keep going in alphabetical order here. So Chloe, you're up next.
Thanks, Natalie. And Andrew, I love the start from SDR to where you're at now. It's like such a sales story, and I'm all about it. I'm Chloe. It's so nice to meet everyone. I'm currently CRO at a company called Pilot.com. We power the financial back office for startups and for small businesses. We're Series C, so coming in just to help scale the business, really grow our sales function in particular right now. Prior to Pilot, I worked for a very early stage company called Brandcast, built out the marketing and sales function. And before that, I joined a company called Eventbrite, bringing that business from about 35 million to 300 to a successful IPO in 2018 with a $1 billion valuation. So have worked in lots of different businesses at different stages and really excited to share some of those experiences with you all today and to be with this fantastic panel.
Jen, you ready?
I am ready. I guess I'm next up alphabetically. Nice to meet all of you. Jen Brannigan. I am currently CRO at Pendo, product adoption platform. We are a Series F kind of later stage startup. I'm coming on my 12-month mark, so hitting that first year. It's been a wild ride. Prior to that, I was at LinkedIn for 10 years. I joined LinkedIn pre-IPO when we were under 1,000 employees and saw it grow to about 13,000, saw it IPO, get acquired by Microsoft. At LinkedIn, I led several of our growth businesses. I led the talent media business, which we took from an $11 million business in 2011 to a $500 million business. I launched a couple of new products. And then most recently, before I went over to Pendo, I led customer success and sales for Glint, which is a company that LinkedIn acquired in 2018. So super excited for the panel and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. We're excited to have you here. Steve, you're up.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with all these modern sales pros and this awesome panel. I am the CRO at LeanData. Been at LeanData. We're a revenue orchestration solution. Been here for about a little over 2.5 years now. And I've been selling technology for, I'm just going to say over 20 years. And that's all, because any longer than that, just it ages me too much. But for a long time. And but my most relevant experience to this topic is probably the time I spent. I spent 12 years in sales at a company called Exactly, which is a sales compensation company. And it's pertinent because I was able to spend my time there from 0 to $100+ million in revenue. So I got to see the growth that it took to get to span that spectrum, and it was really interesting, and I learned a ton. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with everybody today.
Awesome. Well, super excited to kick things off. Let's warm it up here. And Steve, we're actually going to start with you on this one. So get ready. We've brought people here today with the promise of outlining some best practices on the journey from 0 to 100 million, as though it follows some kind of straight or linear path. But in reality, we know it requires a lot of agility and adaptation. So in your experience, what were the most critical milestones or turning points that necessitated change along the way? And were you prepared?
Yeah, that was that new question they kind of threw at us. And you like to think you're prepared and you start out with a plan, but I forget who was it, Mike Tyson, that said everybody has a plan and until you get punched in the face, right? And so that's I think that's true with everything, and that's true with all kinds of plans. And I think it's true even with company plans. And you know, the good news is I think most companies start out with a lot of smart people that are involved, and a lot of CROs, you know, begin their journey and start with a company with a lot of good mentors and smart people that advise them. And so you can sort of plan for those key milestones on your journey. And so, you know, some of the key milestones that I remember, like for example, at Exactly, and some of the things that we're going through right now with LeanData, we're a Series C company, you know, on our journey, and you know, we're talking about things like you know, getting into new segments. You know, as you start out, you typically start out in one segment of the market, say it's mid-market or SMB, and then you want to get into enterprise. And so breaking into those new segments, I think, is a key milestone, or going from domestic to international. I think those are, and changes have to take place, and you have to be prepared for those key things. You don't necessarily want to start doing all of those things at once. And so having plans to do that, because it takes people, takes different processes, a lot of times, different tools, you know, the mentality, the whole company has to sometimes change. So those are some things you can plan for. And then the other thing I thought about was just, you know, the things that you can't plan for necessarily, but you have to react to, like economic situations. And at Exactly, we were chugging along in 2005, and all of a sudden in 2008 and 9, we had that big economic meltdown, and that changed everything and threw a curveball into all of our plans. And all of a sudden we had to course correct. We had to change our messaging now for you know, in preparation for a downturn in the economy. I'm sure everybody just went through that recently. So those are the types of changes and milestones that I think you have to be prepared for. And some you can predict and some you can't.
Great call out. Chloe, how about you? What's your take on this one?
I love that. I think the market dynamics piece is so important, both in terms of like what can you control and plan for, as Steve said, but then also what happens to you and what's your plan to respond to that. Another piece that I was thinking about, and this is when I was at Eventbrite, where we had a product-driven growth piece as well as sales-driven, and both of those channels working together and sort of understanding like what are your potential customers and your customers asking from you. It's an interesting milestone where you begin to understand demand from the market directly, and that can then inform a direction that you can take. It's not to say that you're going to do it or not, but you know, at Eventbrite, there would be different types of companies who hadn't used Eventbrite before suddenly trying to use us for a different way. And so that let us know a couple of things from a milestone perspective. One, the brand was building, right? Like we were becoming a known name and people wanted to use us. And then two, is there actually more evidence or proof that we should explore different segments or markets than we had because people are coming to us organically. At Pilot is something a little bit similar, where we are by and large an inbound business. And so when we have leads come to us that don't fit within our kind of like perfect ICP, it's really interesting to hear why they want to work with Pilot, but also how they heard about us too. And so I like to think about other milestones that can be a result of the brand building that you're doing, and whether or not you decide to do anything with it is just like an interesting way to help inform your strategy. That's also not within kind of the vacuum of your own company. It's what is the market asking of you too.
I think those are also great call outs. I want to kick it over to Alex. I think you have a take, right? So if Steve and Chloe have kind of spoken about some of the external forces and how your company can respond or adapt or ingest some of those messages, I think you were going to share a bit about kind of what happens internally that might drive some pivot points.
Yeah, I really looked at a couple things where how the company has to adapt versus how I think I as a leader have had to adapt. I agree with, you know, what Steve said, going from a single segment where kind of everybody is selling every product to every customer to establishing specializations like commercial, enterprise, SMB, SLED. It's a big change. It involves and impacts a lot of people. Going from a single product to a multi-product company and sale is a big transition. It's everything from product and engineering to marketing to sales to customer success. Like that's a big one. I think as well, just thinking of some of the folks who are likely, watching this live or will watch this recording, and, folks who are either CROs or aspiring to be CROs. I think some of the bigger pivot points for me have been like going from a sales leader to a revenue leader, like going from just sitting over sales teams and having to think about sales to sales, marketing, customer success, support, sales engineering, revenue operations. Like it forces you to go learn those other disciplines and domains and like know enough to be dangerous there to effectively lead those. And then going from hiring and leading ICs and frontline leaders to VPs is a big jump. It's very, very different. Hiring VPs is difficult. Managing VPs is different. Making sure VPs work really, really well together is a big part of being successful in a CRO role. I think those are some of the bigger changes I've had to go through personally to actually be effective in this role.
Andrew or Jen, to round out that part of the discussion and thinking about some of those milestones that were already called out or any others that you might want to, any kind of major failures, let's call it that, any times that you really just like fell on your face in the face of some of these like major forces of change that perhaps you weren't as prepared for or equipped to handle?
Yeah, I think failure is super consistent, right, and super common. Not everything is the shiny bright light, whether it's market conditions or a product launch or whatever else it might be. I think what Alex talked about, like you have to evolve as a leader as the organization's evolving. I think that's really critical. But I think one of the key things is really like around this operational excellence. Like early on, the early stages when you're finding that ICP or finding that go-to-market, I like to use the word brute force. You can kind of brute force the sale in some aspects of things and like figure out how to win some deals. But as you start thinking about your different segments, your different playbooks, what regions of the world you're selling into, having that operational excellence across the business. Are you aligned with product and the product launches and how that's going to drive revenue? Are you aligned with marketing and product marketing and the messaging that we're going to go talk to across segments? And are you aligned with like the future roadmap as well, even down the path? Because the big challenge you often run into is you're focused on this quarter or the next quarter and not the 6 months behind it. And so you really have to start thinking ahead and start that planning and that process and that deployment of that strategy, because you can't show up in the second half of the year, for example, and be like, oh, we're here now, what are we going to do? And so that operational excellence is really key to driving that long-term growth. And it's across the business. It's just not siloed in your sales and your rev ops and enablement team.
Awesome. Jen, let me kick this over to you, but kind of take this in another direction. So actually, Andrew, you set us off on a good path here. We're clearly talking about longer time horizons, zero to 100 million or 10 to 100 million. That doesn't happen overnight. So how do you effectively build these longer term strategies? And how do you actually build the muscle to go from this reactive mode, responsive mode to a more proactive and forward looking approach?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's just incredibly easy to get pulled into reactive mode when you are in hypergrowth. You've got this really intense quarterly focus. Things break all the time, and you'll be incredibly inclined to put Band-Aids on problems rather than fix for the long term. And so you need to be incredibly deliberate and intentional about thinking about your long-term plan. And so, we've made it a team norm at Pendo within my executive team that we will intentionally carve out time on a quarterly basis to talk about the long term. We're going to take the long-term view when we do planning. We're going to take the long-term view on a quarterly basis when we do our QBRs and when we set our OKR. So first of all, it's about where do we need to be in 3 years and what needs to happen today to get us to that place? What do we need to believe right now? And where are we doing okay? And where do we have gaps? And what that does from a process perspective is that creates the operating priorities that we focus on today. And when we carve out those operating priorities, it's incredibly important that they're huge like rocks that our team is focused on, and they're not focused on anything else outside of those operating priorities. They kind of become a bit of a true north for you to allow you to say no to things that are noise and ensure that you have the right people and the right amount of focus on the things that are going to drive your success in the future. And it's just about being intentional and deliberate. My leaders are all exec sponsors of operating priorities. We have critical milestones that we need to deliver. We talk about it in every team meeting. We talk about it in every all hands. And you have to get really comfortable saying no to things that are reactive and are kind of short-term solutions. And you also have to get comfortable that some things are going to be broken and you're just going to have to live through it.
That's such a great call out. I also recently I was asked kind of what matters, and I said, I don't love mediocrity unless it's this like intentional, deliberate mediocrity in favor of some other trade-off where we say we are going to acknowledge that this thing just won't be fixed for now because we've got other fish to fry.
Exactly.
Chloe, what's been your experience with kind of that move to longer term strategic planning?
I think Jen nailed a ton of it, and something that you just said too, Natalie, that is so important is like, understand what's not going to change right now and be okay with it. And that can be very emotional. And I think if you are able to, as Jen said really, really eloquently, like if you know what the strategy of the business is within the mid to longer term, like you always have to go back to that. And it makes it easier then to pull on the thread or like bring the team back from things that are not necessarily not important, but just not important today. And being like ruthless with your prioritization is one thing, but being communicative with that across the business is another. I think using, to get a little tactical, but like using like a goal creation methodology or framework like OKRs across the entire business is one way to drive that consistency for even if somebody in R&D is doing that, but also sales, also CS, et cetera. Like having that kind of shared language is one way to create that cohesion. And then you can communicate in a similar way where you realize you are speaking somewhat of the same language. And then part of that language is getting really good at saying no. I think something that Jen also mentioned that's really important is empowering your teams to say no. If you're at, if you are hyper growth, you might still be building out some of these more executive level or senior roles. And you might be moving folks who are really, really effective ICs into frontline manager roles. This is a brand new muscle for them to flex. People want to be nice. And we sometimes conflate niceness with not giving feedback or not being able to say no, and that's actually not true, right? Like we know that giving real-time feedback is generous and kind, and saying no is also kind, but it's really hard for your teams to do that if you don't put these operating rhythms in place, or at least the semblance of like initial operating rhythms, knowing that again, they're going to evolve over time as your business does too. But I do think it boils down to knowing your priorities, communicating those priorities, measuring incremental progress in a rigorous way, and then managing up and enabling your teams to manage up in a way that makes it easy across the business. Ideas are often really, really good. It's just not the time for them because of the other work that has to be done to nail that strategy that your founders or your executive leadership team have put into place.
Thanks. Alex, any other approaches that you can share in terms of how you have also rolled out like effective longer term planning or moved your teams from reactive to proactive mode?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I didn't put this in my answer, but I think this idea of like being comfortable not solving every problem is actually probably like top piece of advice. Like something I ask a lot is like, is this a paper cut or a gunshot wound? Because like you're not going to bleed out from a paper cut, at least not a few of them, right? Like, but oftentimes the paper cuts are most annoying to the most amount of people. So oftentimes like problems that just aren't that significant to the business are the noisiest one because they're annoying to a lot of people. But like the reality is it's just not killing the business. So it might not be that important to solve first. It's like get comfortable sitting in a room where everything is on fire around you and just like being comfortable letting some things burn for a while is really important to not be reactive all the time. But I think it's like bigger picture than that on this idea of going from reactive to proactive. Start with a solid foundation. Like something I try to answer for every single person in my org is like, is this employee clear on what they have to do and accomplish today and this week to be successful this quarter and next quarter? It's like easier in some functions like sales, harder in some functions like marketing. And I can't say we're 100% there, but is every employee clear on what they need to accomplish day over day, week over week? Somebody told me once, great days make great weeks, great weeks make great months make great quarters, and great quarters make great companies. So like, have you built clarity into your org down to every employee on a daily basis? It also helps when something's not going wrong that you can like trace that back to understand performance across every team and every employee. I also try to be able to answer, like, can you objectively and clearly measure on your team, like who your top 20, middle 60 and bottom 20 are, kind of like in that idea of build a solid foundation of understanding what the inputs each person needs to put in are. It's also really important to make sure every team at the company is aligned and rowing in the same direction. Especially, I think, at hyper growth companies, oftentimes the companies that are scaling the fastest are at risk of having the sales team like blow past everybody, which is like, if your sales team is crushing it and other teams are struggling to keep up, like, it's not a healthy thing for the company. So you got to make sure all teams are aligned, everybody's growing together. Y'all agree on what the top priorities are, like what must happen each quarter and what's a nice to have. Really getting that alignment across the executive team helps you not be reactive on a quarterly basis. And then I'm big, two things I say a lot are start with the end in mind and what would need to be true, like work backwards from there. I think there's a tendency to just start going and doing things versus like, where are we trying to get to? What would need to be true to get there? And how do we set up checkpoints along the way? Like, if it's going to take us, 3 quarters to accomplish this objective, what should be true 2 months from now that we can measure ourselves again to know whether we're on the right track or not? Those are some things that I use often that help.
I love that. First off, I love the imagery as well. You got a lot of imagery in the way that you speak, and it's very, very helpful. Steve, so this is great. We've had a lot of people kind of start to talk about the processes, and there's some tactical stuff in there as well. We've heard mention of OKRs. We've heard mention of some of the metrics alignment. Let's go there. So people showed up today to really hear the game plan from 10 to 100 million. What are some of the playbooks and tactics and processes that you've rolled out that were most helpful in keeping you and your teams aligned to your strategy?
Yeah, that's a biggie, right? It starts with that vision, mission, and strategy. The company sets that, and it needs to be crisp and clear. And then I think it's incumbent upon the head of sales, the CRO, to then boil that down to a vision, mission, strategy for the revenue team that dovetails into the company vision, mission, and strategy. And then from that, you build processes and capacity plans, and that boils down to goals. And to Alex's point, those goals get sifted down into every team, and the metrics come into play. So to his point, every day, everybody knows what their expectations are, and you can measure that. And first line managers, that's their job. And so there's clarity. And that all has to dovetail into, I think, a very tight set of metrics and a sales process. I'm big on sales process that has to be defined. Strategy is great, but that has to get converted into a plan, and then there has to be a process and a playbook that managers are clear on, VPs, managers, and then all the individual contributors understand their role in that playbook, and then RevOps and the teams have to know how to measure that all along the way. And that's what all these great tools we have are for, to make sure that there's clarity in one source of truth, and that's the granular part that I think, some people recoil at, but I think that if that granular sort of measurement, and I think that's really important nowadays, especially when we have a lot of the sales force now that's disparate, right? That's working remotely, and I think it's so that's more important than ever. I think if everybody understand how that filters up to the grand vision, mission, and strategy, then it's okay. Then everybody understands how their little piece, every individual contributor understands how their daily work feeds into that bigger, broader mission and strategy, and why the process is their process for process's sake doesn't make sense. But when that process feeds into the overall mission and the understanding is there, then I think people buy into it, and everybody gets it. So I think that's the most important thing, is that the clarity of that process and the communication, everybody understanding why it's there and what it's there for, that it's there to help them, that sales process.
I love that. We talk about that a lot here at Lattice, where I work now, about this idea of cascading goals and making sure that kind of all the goals kind of flow into one another, top to bottom, top down, and bottom up, so to speak, to make sure that everyone really understands where they fit into the puzzle. Andrew, I know you're big on metrics. So when you think about kind of the metrics piece of it, there's always the risk of like analysis paralysis. So what have you found are the key metrics to actually drive the business forward?
Well, I think it has to align to kind of what Steve was talking about too. Is like, what are those, and Jen for Chloe and Alex too. It's like, what are the big OKRs, right? The OKR should help drive your metrics. From a sales perspective, it's always really easy to measure, right? Like, what's our sales qualified lead conversion? What's our inbound lead conversion versus outbound, and close rates and competition rates? I think the biggest piece of measuring all that data is actually sharing the data. It's actually that cross collaboration, the communication across the organization of how you look at that data. And so, a few things that I've learned over the years, and some things that we're doing currently at Spekit, even, it's like a monthly customer meeting so that our product and engineering team can specifically hear, here is where we have customers that might be struggling, or here's where we're seeing successes. And this is the open tickets or bugs that might be open, to get that collaboration. And furthermore, so that our rest of our leadership team understands where we are winning deals. Like, maybe, for example, as we talked about, like, if you scale and grow, your segments change. Are those assumptions of the segments and our win rates correct? Are they greater? Because that should help drive some product alignment for future products, and should help start to drive the vision and the go-to-market as you guys continue to scale. And again, that can't just be siloed in your Rev Ops team and with you and your revenue leaders. The other big thing I'm a big fan of from a tactic standpoint is, as you sit down with your QBRs, with your revenue leaders and your success leaders, you should make sure all the executive team is involved in participating, right, in those QBRs, so they can hear directly from the frontline managers or those leaders who are on every single call too. So they get the additional data points and anecdotes so that they can go work with their teams as well. And again, it's just not sales, marketing, success looking at the metrics. It's everybody within the organization communicating all those data points that you're measuring. And before you just go roll out a bunch of metrics, make sure that rest of the business understands too what you're measuring and why, because they might find something that would be helpful for them. One of the things I love about Spekit and our product leadership, Jody and Zari, is that we look at product and how will it drive future growth, and how can we measure that as a team. Again, I think that's where that cross collaboration and communication is really, really key.
Love that. We got a great question from the audience, and I want to kind of pop it to the entire panel, see kind of who wants to grab at this one. So kind of piggybacking off of what you were just talking about, Andrew, but how important is the tooling at each stage? And so the question is, how important is it to pick the right sales tools or the right tech stack early for hypergrowth, as it can be challenging to move or migrate to other ones down the line? Who wants to grab this one?
I take a quick stab and then I'll pass. I think every phase has its level of, call it, automation, especially as you get to scale, right? Maybe you're not buying, as much as I love Clary to death, and hopefully we'll buy it soon, but like, you're probably not buying that when you're going from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10, maybe not. But as you start thinking about adding all these additional reps, and you start thinking about sales effectiveness, and you start thinking about CPQ, how long can you band-aid it with like a Google Doc versus actually buying CPQ, that's where having a great Rev Ops leader and partner and the leadership team to help you think through that. And again, you're thinking 6 months in advance. So you're thinking about, how do I start to automate some of these processes as we bring scale into the business, and what's the effectiveness that's going to bring to the organization. So every phase, like 0 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 70, 70 and above, we'll start to bring on that tech stack. And I'm a big believer in like making the investment early, so you're not trying to unwind, because that cost and time from IT, finance, all the not competing, but there are competing priorities, but all the team members that you actually have to work with to go get those things deployed. If you do it right from the beginning and think through that long-term strategy, you'll be way better off than trying to unwind everything, when you're at that $60 million mark and preparing to do the next phase of growth.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew on some stuff. I think you brought up an interesting point around scale. And the question I would ask is, are you trying to solve for scale, or are you trying to earn the right to scale? Because if you're trying to solve for scale, I think your tech stack is really important because you're trying to drive efficiencies and growth. But I think too often people are trying to earn the right to scale. They're trying to figure out how to do something new and how to grow it to earn the right to go scale it. I don't think tech's really that important at all at that stage. I think too often people lean on tech as a crutch. They think this new piece of technology is going to solve their problem, where like it hardly ever does. CRM is really important. Like I would put Salesforce in on day one. Like if you're on, HubSpot CRM or something like that, like get off, move to Salesforce early. Like that one sucks to change later. But outside of that, I pretty much haven't left this room in 2 years. We've gone from 5 million, almost 100 million in ARR, and I use Salesforce, email, and Slack, and that's it.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I would just caution against bloat. Be very careful of tech stack bloat because it's very easy to do. I think sometimes we think there may be silver bullets and all of a sudden you've got a lot of bullets and none of them are really solving the problem, and you're creating a lot of noise and confusion with your field. And so move slowly and move deliberately. But then as you scale and achieve certain milestones, like please don't be afraid to question the longevity of your decisions. Making the move early on is better. I think we tend to get stuck. Oh, we made this decision, we need to stick with it. If it's not the right decision for the long term, do not be afraid to make changes. But I kind of really like what you said there, Alex. Like you can get by with fewer things than I think you actually need. There's a little bit of like an essentialism mindset that I think really helps as you're building up your team.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have Sales Loft and Outreach, and it was just names and a spreadsheet, and like still got it done.
Are there any, there's this idea of timing as well as just like, having the most amazing tech stack, but also this idea of the right timing and right sizing your tech stack for different stages. But are there any regrets, any learnings around like where you put something in too late or put something in too early that you think are kind of really notable examples for people in the audience to learn from that had a material impact on your ability to grow?
I think something that I've experienced that we probably don't talk about enough is be communicative and aware across the entire executive team of all the different technology that's being pushed out, because like changing technology creates fatigue. And it's like, I don't necessarily know if IT is going to push out some change or we're going to a new document management system, right? So it's like, I'm aware of the tech stack in my org, but not necessarily across the org. And I've noticed that just anytime anybody needs to create a new login and change some system they're using, it creates fatigue. And so just be cautious of that across the org.
Great. To bring us back a little bit to kind of our regularly scheduled programming and at least some of the things that we had prepared to speak about, I do want to kick it over to Chloe. We were just talking about, what are some of the playbooks and tactics, and I think we got some great answers here. But one of the things you had brought up in our kind of preparation for the discussion that I really loved was using the customer as your North Star. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it sort of dovetails from what we were talking about from tooling too. It's like, what are the outcomes that you're trying to drive here? At what point? I think we can get, and like, I love process, like consistency is what I strive for my entire life. I am so boring. I'm like, can we just be consistent with how we do things, right? I think sometimes and this is across the business, as we're building our funnel, as we are building out the sales motion, like how do we always keep in mind what the customer's ideal buying journey is? Sales people get, when they get into a habit, it's really hard to break them of that habit, right? Like, and so we deploy a process and they're using it. If they have their pitch deck and they know how to like talk about each slide, the second a buyer throws a wrench in the wheel and asks a question that's off script, sometimes salespeople have a really hard time adapting to that. And if we're not always sort of prioritizing the way in which our buyers prefer to buy stuff that we sell, we can lose track of that. And it's just a really gnarly experience. And we're not setting up our teams well too. So I always think about like, as we're deploying something new, and we're going to try to like actually make that official and formalize that. And as a result, create our Salesforce opportunity objects and stages to match out our exit criteria, et cetera. Is that actually the reality of the way in which the market is buying? And if not, like we're just setting ourselves up to lose, but in an even more expensive way because of the time, the resources, the people who are involved to build that out can be really tricky. So I know, especially like, during the pandemic in particular, digital transformation and buyer's journey like really became a hot topic again, which is fantastic. It should be. And I think sometimes when you're working with other folks in the organization who aren't always customer facing, it's like very important to call that up as you're thinking about building new things, not even just products, but different ways in which your buyers can like interact with your website to ensure that they're always top of mind for you.
Thanks for that. I think that's a helpful North Star, especially when there's a lot of moving parts and pieces to kind of say, how do our buyers want to buy the stuff that we sell? That's a good one. Okay. We heard a lot of kind of the aspirational, here's how you should do it, here's best practice, here are some of the tools and tips. But as we know, reality doesn't always play out that smoothly. And so what we want to do is actually learn from some of the pitfalls that you all have experienced in your time kind of growing these companies. What are some of the common things that tend to go wrong when there's, a good intention around planning? What tends to derail that planning process and put your execution at risk? And I'll just say, feel free to share your most gruesome horror stories here, and prizes will go if you can really bring us to tears. So Jen, let's kick it off with you.
I have to be careful. I don't know who's listening. Joking. Look, I think when I think about where planning has gone wrong, like the kind of key theme or kind of consistent trend would be planning in silos. It's when you have a finance team that's looking to hit a financial target and trying to build to that. And then you've got a sales team that's spinning out capacity models and headcount models. And then you come together and there's a clash and everything explodes. And I've seen it happen multiple times. And through no ill will or ill intent, it's really everybody's just trying to drive toward their own milestones, and sales teams making decisions that may not take into account the demand budget, or marketing's making decisions that doesn't take into account inbound and outbound plan, or you make segmentation changes in sales that may not flow through to customer success. There's a whole bunch of places where planning in silos can really, really have severe impact in the efficacy of the process. And then you've got to unwind decisions and it can become a big, hairy mess. What I've learned over the years is that you almost need to treat planning as a program. And by program, meaning you have guiding principles, you have milestones, you have stakeholder management, you have decision-making frameworks, so that you're ensuring that through the entire planning process, everyone is aligned on, what you're driving to, who's engaged, who needs to play what role in decision-making, so that there's clarity and alignment on what you're trying to drive toward. Oftentimes it actually does require program management, like somebody to own it end to end, who is ensuring that you're ticking the boxes on all the critical milestones. The other thing that I will say that I've seen kind of be amiss in my experience is not tying financial planning to strategy planning. And by that, I mean, okay, we are building our financial model. We're building our headcount plan. We're building our budget. Okay, great. That's done. Okay, now what are the 3 things we're going to be focused on as a company to drive toward growth over the next 3 years? And then you decide those. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. My headcount plan doesn't necessarily reflect these investment areas. And now we need to go back and say, but wait, we want to grow international, but we don't have accelerated headcount growth in international. And then you have to go back to the drawing board, or you're under-resourced. And so making sure that those planning processes are in sync, like what is our long-term 3-year, 5-year growth strategy, and then what is our financial planning process, I think will go a long way in ensuring that you're putting your resources in the right place.
All right. That was pretty gruesome. Who can top that? Alex?
Yeah, there's a lot I could hit on. But I think one of the probably common points when things go wrong is like just hiring the wrong person, right? Especially when you're talking about leaders, like getting a key leader hire wrong is really painful. Like nothing seems to go right from that point forward. And so I'd say making sure you're hiring the right people, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself. And then make sure you set them up for success. And one thing we do at Flock that I really appreciate is every employee at every level gets a first 90-day plan where it goes week by week with what does success look like each week. There's different milestones. You should have accomplished this by this date. And so it becomes a really like data-driven and objective way to understand like how is somebody performing over their first 90 days. Because our feeling is like, if somebody doesn't work out in their first 90 days, like that's okay. Worst case scenario, somebody doesn't work out between their 6th and 12th month because that was just a bad hire and poor leadership, poor management. And so I would say so many of the, problems and pitfalls that I've run into have been based on poor hiring or poor ramping of new hires.
Great call out. Steve, what's been your experience with where things tend to go wrong?
Yeah, especially in small companies, and I'll kind of expand on what Jen was saying, and it just, I've seen situations where it's a lot of it's just been in that whole concept of planning in silos, where I've seen it so bad where I've seen companies where they actually look at sales as such a separate entity, where they say, oh well sales missed its number, but Mark, we hit our number. Where they literally would say, they wouldn't even say sales number, they'd say Steve's number. They'd call it Steve's number, and we hit our number. And I'm like, Steve's number? Steve's number is the company number. What are you talking about? It was like, they don't realize that Steve's number was the number of the company. If Steve misses his number, the company misses its number. And not here, of course, but I'm just saying, I've seen that happen at companies when they grow, and it's so siloed that people get really guarded, or marketing or partners, they have their individual siloed numbers, their goals, and they'll be happy that they hit their goal, even if another group misses their goal. And that's just a complete disaster. You have to have joint plans, and what I've seen, what we do now, and what I've seen work really well is when it's a joint revenue plan, and there's a question here about where do you see the future of the CRO role, and it's a joint role. It involves marketing, it involves customer success, it involves every aspect of revenue, where it's a joint goal, and revenue includes pipeline, it includes customer, it includes retention. It's not just sales or marketing or churn or there's not all these siloed goals. It's actually a joint revenue plan that includes everything, and everybody has aspects of that goal that they care about. So there's metrics that everybody has to care about. Mm-hmm. So it's not Steve's goal or marketing's goal or customer success's goal. It's actually, there's going to be joint corporate goals. There's going to be individualized goals, so everybody understands what they're accountable for. You don't want to erase individual accountability or team accountability, but there has to be an aspect of joint accountability where everybody cares that each group is successful, and everybody has skin in the game, so to speak. So I think that's where some companies break down. I still see it today, where there's very siloed organizational metrics and goals, and one group will be, I hit mine, they missed theirs, but as long as I hit mine, I'm good. Yeah. And that's just a breakdown, and companies just won't be able to scale and grow that way.
Thanks. We're kind of heading into the final stretch here, and I think there's a great question from the audience that can help us kind of start to conclude the discussion, and then we'll certainly go around and do some final thoughts. But the question was, I'm curious to know what you all think the future of the CRO role looks like. And I think Steve gave some great insight there. Who wants to take this one?
I'll jump in. And to piggyback off to go into the answer to this question too, I think when you're thinking about that planning exercise and how you come to market, like as a CRO, which I think that this role is moving more into like a COO role in a lot of aspects, because you're trying to corral so much of the business, is you control so much of the energy of the business as well. So if you aren't hitting metrics, or the metrics are upside down and only one department, to Steve's points, feels like they're finding success, like that has a massive impact to not only your employees' morale, both across product and the organization and engineering, but customer success. And then there's a additional impact to customers, right? Like your employees need to feel like they are fulfilling their goals and the mission of the company as you go to scale. And one thing that I really think we do well at Spekit specifically is, like, for our planning, first we just sit down and we bring an outside consultant and just help us think about what our vision is as an organization, how we work better together. And that kicks off that planning and that strategy to understand where everybody's at in their journey within the organization, their journey in our growth, and what their visions are for the next 3 years. And that really kicks off our plan for the following year. But again, I think where I see the CRO role really rolling to is people are talking about owning marketing plus RevOps and enablement plus some of these other roles. It's really more of a true operator of the organization because revenue touches every aspect of that business. And I think that's what we're starting to see, and that evolution's been happening now for the last 3 to 5 years, if not longer.
Any other hot takes on where the role is evolving?
Yeah, kind of nuanced, but I think the word growth should replace revenue in the title, because I don't look at my job as just to drive revenue for the company. I look at it as my job is to grow the company, and revenue is a big part of that, but it's not the only part. There are efficiency aspects of that. You have to drive, certain gross margin, sales and marketing efficiencies, other efficiency metrics. You also need to lead, develop, and inspire people. I view a big part of my role is to bring energy to the org and set the tempo for how we're going to go attack this market. And so I personally just think this role is about growing the company, which is part revenue, but there's a lot more to it.
Awesome. Well, I can't believe, but we're almost at the top of the hour. And so I want to go around and get some kind of final thoughts. So I want to invite our panelists to share with us, what are the 1 or 2 key takeaways that you hope people come away from this discussion thinking about and hopefully acting on? Let's start with you, Chloe.
I think the alignment piece is really key, and I think it's easier said than done. So one of the themes that seems to be coming out of here is whether it's your role where you're overseeing, multiple functions, or you are working closely with somebody else, it's making sure that your goals, your strategy, your priorities, more importantly, I think, are really well communicated and understood. And it's okay to disagree on certain things, but making sure that everyone is aware of what's happening and tracking that rigorously is really, really important. Not only because it keeps everyone on the same sort of train track, but it's also a way to give other folks who you are growing in your organization sort of the muscle and the skill set to begin to have that same sort of executive presence and ability to operate that way too, which is a nice kind of snowball effect there too. So communication is key, easier said than done.
Awesome. And one thing you said when we were preparing, you mentioned this idea of short-term paranoia. Can you expand on that?
Oh, I am tremendously paranoid all the time. It's around operating with paranoia in the day-to-day, right? Assume things are going to go wrong, right? Not to give yourself a heart attack per se, but just assume things aren't going to go wrong. It's when you train your sellers, don't have happy ears, right? Look for the objection or the risk that might not be super, super explicit, but it could be there. And try to get ahead of it, right? How do you mitigate those things that can pop up and really, really curtail what you're doing? But don't lose the balance of making sure that you are thinking of the big picture, that you are unwavering in your belief of the optimism and the impact that your company is going to have on the market, on the customer, et cetera. And that should be sort of your driving force for what you're doing. But operating with that paranoia in the moment is a way to make sure that wrenches aren't thrown in your wheel, really.
That's awesome. That really resonated for me. I'm so glad you spoke about that one. Steve, how about you? What are the key takeaways you hope people get from this?
Well, I think just going back to the whole theme of going from 10 to 100 million, I mean, along that journey is a lot of change, and the company's going to change. Some you can plan on, and like we said at the beginning, some you can't predict. And I think it's incumbent for the CRO or the head of sales. They have to change along with it. I think that's the one thing that's inevitable, is that change. And so your ability to be open-minded and course correct and reinvent yourself and adapt to the new environments and the changes, staying true to yourself, but at the same time being open to changing and adapting and accepting new ideas. I've had to do that in just the last couple of years, you get sort of set in one way, and then new things happen, and you have to course correct. But I think it makes you better, and you become stronger. And to Alex's point, you become a better leader because of it. So I think that's a really important key thing that good sales leaders have to embrace.
Love that. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, I'll give you two, but I'll hit on the most important one. Is like, if I could only, if you're an aspiring CRO or want to be an effective CRO, or really any executive, if I could only be great at one thing, it would be to become a great team builder. Like, if you are great at that, it's almost like nothing else matters. Like, if you get that right, that's all you need. And I think of that as the ability to hire and develop great talent, putting people in the right positions. Like, organizational design is a competitive advantage. So it's not just the right people, but the right people in the right positions. And then enabling and helping people work really well together. I spent a lot of my time making sure that my directs worked exceptionally well together, because like that's so important. And so for me, those are the three things that go into becoming a great team builder, which is largely all that matters. A little bit more tactical. We talked a lot about planning. And I think one thing that I encourage people is to really understand their operating model, which is usually built by finance. Like, really understand your inputs, assumption, and sensitivity. And as an example, when you're building plans for, hey, we're heading into Q4, we need to build next year's plan, we need to build our 3-year plan. It's often based on headcount numbers and assumptions. And so make sure you understand the models and the sensitivity really well. Like, speaking from a sales and a revenue perspective, you have number of heads in seat, you have quota per head, you have quota participation per head, and you have ramp time. Like, those are 4 key variables we use to plan and build our operating models. And so understanding, like, well, if a rep ramps in 6 months versus 8, what does that mean? If they have 80 versus 90% quota participation, what does that mean? I think I've seen that people don't spend enough time really understanding the inputs and sensitivity of the model, and I would highly encourage you to do so.
Thanks. Andrew, we'll go to you, and then Jen, you'll bring us on home.
Yeah, I think everybody's touched on some key points, and I'm just going to actually piggyback on Alex's, because I think it's really critical is developing your leaders. One of the things that we do here at Spekit that I've invested in, is actually getting coaching. So outside of just like, my day-to-day mentoring, but actually we brought a program in called Abundant, to where all my leaders get that bi-weekly personal coaching. There's so many aspects of what we do, not only inside the work world, but also outside of the work world, that has an impact on performance and helping people fine-tune that. We're very big on the growth mindset here at Spekit. Like, I'm a huge advocate for it, like, because we have to continue to grow and evolve, and we're all going to make mistakes, right? Nobody gets fired for making a mistake, but can we learn from that mistake and where it happened and why it happened? So I think that's a huge piece, because to Alex's point, if you could get your leadership growing, developing, tackling challenges, and helping you identify areas that maybe aren't on your radar of what might be coming, you can really start to scale and grow effectively as a company, not just a go-to-market team, but as a company. And the last piece I tell everybody, it's just software. Go have fun. Like, have fun building it. Like, it is just software at the end of the day. So have fun along the journey. And part of having that fun is talking to other revenue leaders, like joining this panel here, for example, but also go talk to your network, go talk to your board. Like, your board should be there to support you, not to ridicule you, and go ask for advice. I meet with a couple of our board members on a quarterly basis and let them know what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling and what I feel like I need to do next. They're experts in the industry for a reason, right? So go use your network, go use your board to get to where you want to be.
I love that. We've heard so many great ideas, and yet I'm sure that Jen still has more for us.
Lots of similar themes here. Mine's maybe a slight bend on one of them, which is on the talent piece. It's get the right people on the bus, but hire for adaptability, flexibility, and agility, because the people that you hire are going to have completely different jobs in 18 months. just inherently, when you are in hypergrowth, the job is going to change, and you cannot have people who are stagnant or like, oh, who moved my cheese? It used to be this way. You need to have people who can grow and flex and mold with the business. And so hire those franchise players. I think to Alex's point, find the right seat for them, and then maybe they'll have another seat. But it's really looking for the people who you know can grow and scale with the business. That's number one. And then number two, as a revenue leader coming into any stage organization, you are never going to have all the answers, and don't expect yourself to have all the answers, and don't hold yourself to that high of a standard that you should have all the answers. There are things that you're going to have to figure out on the fly. You're going to have to fake it till you make it sometimes, and you're going to have to leverage your network and leverage your resources. And the nice thing is that there are plenty of people now who have done this, who have built, who have gone through similar challenges. And so you don't have to take all of the world's problems onto your shoulders. That's been a big learning for me as somebody who always tries to be a perfectionist, is that sometimes you just have to cut yourself a little bit of slack and realize that you're not going to know the answer, and you're going to have to try a couple things. You may get it wrong a few times, but ultimately at the end of the day, there's not one answer to any problem. And there's plenty of resources out there who can tell you what they tried at, what failed them, and what worked.
Amazing. I want to thank our incredible panelists for sharing their wisdom, their experiences with us today. If you are interested in hearing more, I invite you to reach out to our experts directly on LinkedIn. And just want to say a big thanks to MSP for bringing us all together. And sorry, I really sucked at our time management because we went over.
Oh, barely.
Janisha, did you want to come back and wrap things up with us?
Did I time it right?
Yep. Oh, not sure we can hear you.
All right. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Of course,
Yes.
the whole chat thought it was so good. They don't want me to speak, and I'm with them. You guys, this is such an incredible panel. Thank you so much. Jennifer, Chloe, Andrew, Alex, Steve, and of course, Natalie, our incredible moderator. This is such a rich and amazing discussion. I was sitting watching live like, oh, okay, let me take all these notes down. So thank you all so much for joining. Of course, here at MSP, we want to thank our sponsors again for all of the support that they have put into this incredible summit. Thank you, Snaps, kudos. Please, again, continue to show them love for us. And thank you all so much for joining us. So what's next? Of course, we're about to take our virtual summit into an in-person event. So if you are in New York or San Francisco, please join us later today for our in-person happy hours in New York. It's actually happening right now at the Flower Shop on 107 Eldridge Street in Manhattan. And if you're in SF, join us a little bit later today at the Anina. That's 482 Hayes Street. We hope to see you in person. Again, thank you all so much for joining us for our Supercharged Summit. We can't thank you enough to our community, to our speakers, our panelists. And with that, I'm going to ask our lovely panelists to head backstage. We're going to debrief. But for those of y'all that have joined us, thank you so much again. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you very soon. Take care, folks.